Kaya, how are you? Nice to see you again. Yeah, I'm doing all right. Looks like you got a nice warm jacket, which sure going to get a workout today. So I did not have a successful morning over in Richmond. Yeah, this is going to be a multiple-year effort to change minds, but we've got to change the legislature first. That's the key part. Yep, hope so. You never know. Keep our fingers crossed. The degree of resistance to change and maintaining old ways.
Emailed me back and said that was great to go talk about transit. And Rick said fine, he's going to be out of, he's at Vaco. So I think I may be okay. Well, and I'm not, it's okay. I don't mind. I just thought if I have an opportunity, maybe to use some of the stuff I used Monday around transit, because it's federal stuff. Which is a little edgy, but it's fun. It's kind of fun.
Thank you.
Coffee or tea? Okay. I can't drink coffee.
So I managed to get to each supervisor before tonight. How are you? To tee everybody up to talk about or have ideas. So make it through tonight.
Okay. Jeff, move in. Move in.
In the process.
You're in the process now. You're almost in completely. I'm going to be in Richmond tomorrow night, so sometime over the weekend. Okay, I'll call you. I think I know where you got your number. I got your number, buddy.
Thanks, Brad. So I
Table just what's in the back.
Yeah.
feels like the United Nations. All the media, everybody, all the staff here.
The sound guys did the business.
I got an email from he just
You hear the statistic, I heard it coming in a parking garage, that African American home ownership in this country, African American home ownership in this country has not moved in 50 years. The percentage in 50 years.
yeah.
Just
We got multiple things going on.
the barriers that are there.
They just
I found the hot. Oh, you have hot too.
I might
The other one. Oh, I don't want food. I just want drink. Good.
Oh, good. Yeah,
Greg had fixed us something to eat, and I didn't have the heart.
I'm amazed at the capacity.
I just ate it and kept my mouth shut. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we brought it in. You know, I got home and he had stuffed peppers, and I didn't have the heart to not eat them. I just kept my mouth shut and ate.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Because I mean, it also.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what it is?
I'm not eating, so I don't feel self-conscious at all. I'm gonna stare at you eating.
Huh? I tried to get you to come. You'd already done that.
So I think it's like-
So, good evening. I call this meeting to order on behalf of Charlottesville City Council. We have one counselor that, Counselor Bellamy, who's running a little behind. He'll be here before 6:30 and join us.
And I call the Alpine County Board of Supervisors to order.
Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. I'm Emily Kilroy, the Director of Communications and Public Engagement for Albemarle County. And joined here, we'll do just a quick staff introduction.
Leslie Beauregard, Assistant City Manager with the City of Charlottesville.
Mike Murphy, Interim City Manager.
Jeff Richardson, County Executive.
Kathy Galvin, Charlottesville City Councilor.
Ned Galloway, Albemarle County Board of Supervisors.
Heather Hill, Charlottesville City Council.
Liz Palmer, Albemarle County Board of Supervisors.
Nakaya Walker, Charlottesville City Council.
Rick Randolph, Albemarle County Board of Supervisors, Scottsville District.
Mike Signer, Charlottesville City Council.
Ann Malik, Whitehall District, Albemarle County Supervisor.
Diantha McKeel, Albemarle County Board of Supervisors.
Norman Dill, Albemarle County Supervisor.
Greg Campner, County Attorney.
Last and certainly least.
Not so much. Not so much.
Now.
Pulling out the sympathy card, I mean to tell you, you know.
I know that's probably the first time an attorney has got a sympathy sound for people.
Behind Leslie and I are the clerks, Claudette Borgerson. They're not mic'd, so Claudette Borgerson for the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors. Keena Thomas, I think this is her first meeting with the Charlottesville City Council clerk. Welcome. Under the close watch of Brian Wheeler, Director of Communications for the City of Charlottesville. There are a lot of staff in the audience from both the city and the county, and because there's so many, we won't take the time to individually recognize everyone, but I did want to just point out that there are a lot of staff here, and to thank them for spending their evening with us. And depending on how tonight's discussion goes, we may ask individuals in the audience to come and provide some additional context, and we certainly appreciate their time here with us tonight, as well as our wonderful media, of course. I did also want to take a minute to thank Chip Boyles, the director of the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission, for hosting us this evening. Thank you, Chip, for the space and the welcome.
I appreciate the 55 of you that came.
Now that that's on record.
So tonight is a follow-on from the meeting that the joint meeting that the Board of Supervisors and City Council had in October of 2018, and the request at the time was really to look at priority setting in a collaborative context. So how can the city and the county identify opportunities to work together on items that are of sort of a shared priority? So that's why we're gathered here today. One of the things that when we started planning for tonight became pretty clear was this is a next conversation in how to get towards some more real concrete projects that we're hoping to be able to talk about together again as we get into the late summer and early fall of later this year. Looking at the desired outcomes for this evening, it's really about building relationships, sharing some information, and establishing a process towards collaborative budget-related priority setting, and also for a process for collaborative strategic goal setting. Those are the hopes for this evening, and we'll see where we land. Quick look at the agenda. We'll do a look at past collaboration efforts, a quick review of some more present-oriented collaboration efforts, and then really spend the bulk of the evening discussing what the future should look like. And then we'll do a quick closing and next steps. So the first, we're gonna have to do a little bit of an audible, but the first thing that we wanted to do was really ground ourselves in the strong history of collaboration in Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville. And so you all are seated, your placards were put out, you're seated together by city and county tenure. So someone in your pair will has been in the community for a long time, and the other in the pair will have been in the community for less time. And in front of you, sort of between you, are yellow cards that have city-county collaborations in various decades. The pairs are Mayor Walker and Vice Chair Randolph, Vice Mayor Hill and Supervisor Palmer, Supervisor McKeel, Supervisor Malik, and Councilor Signer. Norman, if you wanted to join that, Mr. Dill, if you wanted to join with Ms. McKeel, and then Councilor Galvin and Chair Galloway are a pair as well. So there's a stack of yellow pieces of paper by your tent cards.
Emily, it sounds like there was 4 in our group.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
but
named Ann and myself and Wes and Norman. We're just, it's so early for me
Yeah.
to already be confused.
Ms. McKeel and Mr. Dill, since you're sitting next to each other, would you like to be partners?
Okay, but Wes is coming.
Yeah, and he can
Yeah.
join you
Yeah.
when he
Okay.
arrives.
All right.
So does everyone have their yellow pieces of paper?
Yes.
Okay. So each pair has from 1970s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, one from each decade collaboration between the city and county that happened in that decade. And so you'll put those in order, and when you're ready to put them up on the wall, you'll put them up on the wall on the sheet of paper that's labeled the correct decade. We'll take a couple minutes to go through those.
The hell is she talking about? Oh, she wants us to do this. That's 70s. 70s.
You cannot use the internet.
Natural
But
area.
this is an easy one.
I guess what it is.
We're all in the second,
In the 1970s, it was not. I had
Oh, you have one from.
skate park.
Seems like it would be on this.
Yeah, this is 2000. What's the purpose of this
Regional
exercise?
hazards, materials that get lost. That's very,
That's the 1970s. But that's what we'll probably have to keep, because I think Gordon Cow.
I feel like they've been on.
Gordon Cow was
70s,
the
80s, 90s.
airport was 80s. I knew I thought the
No
airport-
I in T.
And we can
Yeah.
just put a question mark on that or
and
just
airport was
I'll just go off.
the 80s.
Saving that.
this was, okay.
Okay.
Java must have been therefore.
These are the
Yeah, that's a good.
I think we ought to just call
Would
this
be
one
the
skate
70s.
park and say.
Would Java have Java's pretty old.
Because the skate park is 2019.
Community attention, that's what's for families.
Well, the reservoir was built in 60.
Yeah.
So we
So
are
Java,
going,
that has to be. Yeah, I would put that in the 70s and into 2000.
Although maybe not.
This in the 2000s and these in the 70s.
your reservoir,
You know that's all.
at least community attention, I don't know about philosophy.
I might go that way. Absolutely. We're not going to claim any of it.
So we know that.
So you think,
I think Java's the oldest. The airport down the road.
Crazy children. I don't know anything else we would have that would be that recent. All of these are pretty old.
Well,
no, okay, never mind.
yeah, actually, I have during the house in the
80s to
Emily, is there going to be a prize?
The prize is collaboration.
Yeah, they have city hats.
We should have our own, although I don't wear hats, so.
She was just showing up.
I do not like hats, so.
Well, I've been forced to wear a hat today. It's so cold.
Look at these two negotiating deals over.
Okay, everybody done?
There's a scandal afoot.
All right, so I had asked some staff assistants, Doug and Kevin and Andy, if they would help
One at a time, starting from the
with the reveal.
1970s. All we're doing is just, there's no drama.
There's no drum roll.
You're not telling us if they're right or not, is that it?
The 1970s with music from ABBA. What's 76?
Oh. You'll have to read those to us, Doug, because we can't.
SWA was not in 1970. So read them out to us, Doug, because the Java is on there.
You want to read them?
Sorry?
You want to read them?
Sure. Blue Ridge Juvenile Detention Commission, RSWA, or our Security
Maybe that just that
Regional
particular
Library
part.
Agreement, Jefferson Area Board of Aging, and RWS.
Okay.
Great. The 1980s?
What was the one we were?
Well done, Jana.
We got that one?
We got that one right?
No, we didn't. No, we did that now.
All right, 1980s, we have the Christmas Tree Recycling Program, Ivy Creek Natural Area, the PACC created, Airport Authority, and the Therapeutic Recreation Program.
Well, we got this one. Now we got Blue Ridge Detention Center.
We have those.
All right.
We have
All right, the 1990s.
That one's
CSA, what used to be the Children's Services Act, I guess now the Comprehensive Services Act, now the Children's Services Act. Skate Park, Dardentown Park, Thomas Jefferson Health Department, and the Regional Jail Authority Agreement.
That was more recent than we thought.
So that means
Right,
SBC.
2000s.
That's interesting. We have that flipped. I would have thought, I guess they've heard of that. Was it just Charlottesville?
So, in the 2000s, we had the SPCA agreement, Community Attention Foster Families Program, City-County Fire Services Agreement, Regional Hazardous Materials Response Team, and the Greenway Program.
Wow. That was older.
Finally, in 2010,
1 for 5.
Thomas Jefferson Area Coalition for the Homeless, the Courts Agreement, Hydraulic 29 Small Area Plan, TAP Grant for Fifth Street Station Jail Hub, and the Ravenna River Corridor Plan.
Yay.
25 days.
Yeah. Clap.
Ringer.
So that's a list of 25 collaborations since the 1970s between the city and the county. That's not by any means comprehensive. Is there anything up there that you wish you were seeing up there?
K-Tech?
On the school side, sure.
YMCA.
YMCA. Did anybody learn anything from that?
I'm not sure. I just walk in and I see Rick doing YMCA. Quite sure what's going on here.
We're talking about the village people.
Oh, okay. It makes
No,
sense.
we were talking about what wasn't included in the 4 decades we have up here of other projects we thought were significant as cooperation between the city and.
I thought you were showing off your new dance moves. So I,
Later.
Got later.
So we put up the different agreements as to the decade where they were passed.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So that will move us into present collaboration.
Okay, thank you. So the focus of this is really going to be, you want to go to the next slide, around the MOUs. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about these. You revisited these back in October. You received updates on these back then. 4 of these, except for economic development, were developed in 2016, and economic development was done in 2017. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about what it might mean. Do you want to go to the next slide? To actually start to use the MOUs to guide some future collaboration in terms of how can they do this better, or how would you like to see these more effectively provide the collaboration, or kind of, in one way to look at it is how do we begin to actually operationalize the MOUs by looking at the initiatives, and then how can they contribute to strategic planning and goal setting. So we kind of wanted to have an open conversation with you all about that, and thinking back to, I think you have a copy in front of you of the MOUs, so you can look at those as well. There's been a lot of work done in all these areas, obviously, in the past several years. And as we talk about the future, we may have some more suggestions on how we can take the MOUs and together do some more work in these areas, especially in strategic planning. But we wanted to hear from you all about what you think the present looks like in that regard.
Do you like comments for each MOU?
It could be, sure. If there's an area that you see.
Leslie, I guess I'll just kick it off here with a couple of maybe comments or thoughts, or maybe even a question. When my remembrance, when we created the MOUs way back when, because some of them have been around for a little while, one of the intentions was to help drive our staff to better cooperating with each other between the city and the county. And that gets at where it says designate a staff member assigned to promoting success. Because while we come together once or twice a year, where the real rubber meets the road is when our staffs take the initiative and actually pick up the phone and say, we're working on something on Barracks Road. It's right where the line is, or certainly in my world, the city is across the street Albemarle County is here, we're doing this. How can we make sure that we're coordinating and working together on that project? And for me, that was one, maybe because of where my district, a lot of my district is, but that was a really big driver for me. And so I guess to ask, has a designated staff member been assigned to promoting the success of each one of these MOUs? Who's taken the responsibility? Has that happened? Or is that something that we need to do if we're really going to implement the intent of the MOUs? And I'm not trying to answer a question with a question, but.
To follow up on what Amanda saying, it's almost like, I guess we, the electeds, would be asking staff what action items have fallen out of the MOU instead of us
Yeah.
putting forward action items for you to work on. I mean, that's how I'm reading this.
Yeah, and kind of a follow-up, Kathy, yeah, how does staff feel like these are lacking or working, and how can we make them better, or how can we implement? Because that's certainly, I think those of us that were around when we created these, I think I'm right that that was the intent.
Correct.
Was to try and have our staffs very conscious of the fact that cooperation between the city and the county in our daily work sometimes is critical because of where, you know, our community.
And maybe if we're to do this round of questions or kind of together, and then staff can figure out how to, I mean, should we each ask, or we could all contribute and then, okay, so if we're all just gonna line them up, so my two would be, or my question would be, or suggestion, so I think that's a great question, what Diantha said, but so the three that I'm most curious about and that I think we could build on success with are there are areas that cross these boundaries readily. So economic development, how is that working on a project basis, especially with these big things that are going to come up on 29 or in the different magisterial districts? What's happening? Is the cooperation happening, or the two economic development? Because the county, I know, is so much more active now in economic development than they had been, and there's so much activity in the city, which we saw in the recent strategic plan update that we got. That's one. Two is affordable housing. This has come up a lot in city meetings recently. It seems like any strategy that the city did that didn't address the county would not be sensible, because the county has such an important role to play, especially with regard to population. A lot of people leave the city and move in the county. So are we, a lot of people in the county are working in the city. Are we working together on affordable housing as we look in the 10 or 20 year horizon? Like, what are we doing? Are we doing it together? Or are we doing it apart? We should be doing it together. And it seems like, especially for us, it's become so much more of a priority in the last few years. The third thing would be greenhouse gases, because they cross boundaries. Are we working together? Are we setting goals together? We joined the Climate Mayors Initiative. We have a lot of initiatives happening. So can we work together on our goals and our programs?
I think you raised a very good point, Mike, and as I look at it, our role is to be strategic as a body and a collective body. And when we first started 3 years ago, we established 4 priorities: education, environment, affordable housing, and transit. And the question you're really raising is, are those the same compelling strategic priorities that we should be addressing now? And I think we need to have that conversation to say, really, what are the 4 priorities right now? And then it's, I think, incumbent on us as a body to establish priorities collectively here today and say, this is what we think is the first priority between the county and the city together that we work on. This is the second priority. Here's the third. Here's the fourth. And we can't do everything well in terms of collaboration. And we're better off probably thinking about concentrating on one or two priorities than saying, okay, we're going to do all four. Because we say we're going to do all four, we're not really going to be able to get around to all four in a meaningful way. But what would be useful is to agree on, I would submit one or two here today, and whether they are the same as before, I don't think we should be bound by that. That was a decision 3 years ago. Certainly for our board, our top strategic priority was climate change. And so a discussion with council about climate change and whether that should be truly a collaborative priority is worth having. Affordable housing still resonates. So here we are 3 years later, and that hasn't changed at all. And economic development really wasn't something we talked about 3 years ago. But we are cooperating on economic development projects. We're not engaging in zero-sum game behavior with one another. We're trying to be collaborative and cooperative. So I think it'd be a good idea to actually, I would submit, try to put together a list of what people think should be on the table in the parking lot for strategic priorities, and then try to reach agreement as a body what we think are the most important of those four, and then rank those four, and then try to provide some direction to staff. This is what we would like back on at least two of them. If we can do all four, that's great.
So in our pre-meeting on Friday, I suggested that maybe we even, look at, I guess, a broader view before we start narrowing. We each have our strategic plans, and they're separate. And if we were willing to look at coming up with some joint strategic plans to add to our individual, plans, so that we know as a body that we've agreed to collaborate on whatever those big pictures are, and then our staff would know that that is the focal point of our joint efforts. And it would be on our websites, it would be, on the county's website, what those areas are that we're gonna focus on together. Then we can get back to modifying MOUs and actually making sure that throughout, the 12-month period, we're actually moving forward on whatever areas we said we're going to work on jointly.
I just want to respond to what Rick said, which is just because it followed my comments and seemed to paraphrase them. I couldn't, with respect, disagree more, and that was not a paraphrase of what I said. I don't agree with the premise that we would, in taking on one thing, we would have to lose another, and we could only pick one or two. That's not, I think, how government works. That's not how regionalism works. I would think kind of exactly the opposite, that we set out 4 priorities that were the 4 MOUs. They each contained pretty broad directives. Then we picked up a 5th. And the way the government works is you can't, have to chew gum and then stop walking. They actually branch out, and they would lead to more and more and more. So that's one of the points of this exercise. If at one juncture, the two bodies had said, well, we just started doing skate parks, so we have to stop doing health together, I just think we would start to cooperate more down different paths, and then different branches would come off, and we could, I just totally disagree with the premise, and it's not what I intended to say. I think that, so when I'm suggesting that the 3 priorities I brought up actually would each fall under one MOU. So the natural environment one, climate, intensified cooperation on greenhouse gases would be one, the more focus on specifics about affordable housing in light of the city's recent steps forward and what's happening with TJPDC, that would obviously fall under affordable housing, that MOU, and economic development. I just would like, as it drills down in more specifics in light of the county's new activity. So that's just how I see it.
I think, can I go for a second? So we have 2 threads here. We have our strategic plans and how they're going to coordinate, but I have to go back to what Diantha said to begin with, in that we need to hear from staff as to what they've done, because, for instance, climate change, the county is now developing their climate action plan, and Norman and I happen to be on that committee, so we know that the county staff is working with the city staff on that. And so that's and we're getting information from the city because the city's already done theirs, and because everybody recognizes that they have to coordinate. We also have, transportation is one. Each time we have one of these meetings, we'll bring up those areas where the city and the county meet, where we need to have multimodal transportation. And I know mine that I keep bringing up is my area that has a lot of affordable housing going in, Timberland Park just opened up. We're having I always forget, it's Brookdale. I always forget which brook it is, Cliff or all the different brooks, but Brookdale is going to be opening up. That's got a 96 units on Old Lynchburg Road extended that is 60% AMI. We need to get people underneath 64. They can't safely go under 64 on Old Lynchburg Road extended. And so those folks that are going into all that affordable housing need that connection. So we bring these things up at every meeting, and our staff is working on that area, your staff is working on that area, but the CIPs and the plans never seem to match at the same time. And, things like this year is a transportation alternative grant year. Why can't we take a place like that and merge the transportation needs and affordable housing needs and get our staffs to get together and, and make a plan like that? So I understand the strategic initiatives issue, but I also want to make sure that we're not duplicating what we did last time, because our staffs are already working on that and all of us just aren't aware.
Thank you. So one question, I agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Palmer as well as Ms. McKeel. I think you both are right. I also think, Rick, you have some valid points. But when I look at this list, I'm wondering, so if there are areas of overlap and things that we've clearly heard from both of our communities that they would like to see, whether that's just from those who've been coming to the meetings as of late, the topic around like race and equity and affordable housing and so forth. If there are also just plain and blatant points of overlap, can we also begin to discuss those at length? I know, again, we want to hear from our staff about how we're working together and then them somewhat provide us with some direction. But I mean, I think in this current time where we are, I would hate for us to squander this opportunity to address some of these hot topic issues that many of our community members want to hear how the city and the county are going to work on. And honestly, I mean, we can't go anywhere throughout our community and our region without hearing about the topic of race and equity and affordable housing. While I believe that all of those issues are important, and again, we have overlap, those are two that I think both constituencies talk to us a great deal about, and they want to hear what we are both going to do about it. And it would be great if we could say what we're going to do about it collaboratively.
And while race and equity isn't listed on the Albemarle's priorities, it's built into the redevelopment issue and urban neighborhood revitalization. So it's part of it. It isn't singled out, but it's very much an implicit part that we're wrestling with, especially in the context of Southwood.
And I apologize if it came off just now as if I was saying it's not important to y'all. That wasn't the intention. Oh, okay. Because I know it. Yeah.
I was following your idea, and I was looking at race and equity and thinking, well, we don't have it on our list, but in a way we do.
It's
so
right.
Anybody that is looking at this fresh would say, well, we're ignoring that issue, but that issue is subsumed in as an overall, more of a major issue of redevelopment and urban neighborhood revitalization.
And for us, it's in broadband.
And broadband also, a very good point.
Well, it's in multiple ones.
Workforce and economic development, outdoor recreation, all these different things.
Right, but if on the I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, though, maybe it would help us if we could understand how staff is using the MOUs now. That might be, and that's just me, but, and I'm sorry, but, yeah, go right ahead.
Oh, I didn't even know there was a,
I was kind of going
okay.
on.
Well, and I'll largely pass my,
I'm insisting that it's going on.
That's good. We get it. We get it. It's okay.
and I'll just make one point, because, I mean, I'll keep moving, but for me, I guess this is, again, the systems brain. All these things are intertwined. And so it's hard for me to look at anything in silo, because all of these things, when I look at all these memorandum of understanding, all of these things, you know, affect each other when we think about housing and transportation, education, economic development. So I just think it's important that we look at this more as a system instead of trying to isolate certain facets of that system out. So.
I think a lot of what I'm hearing, I know, is going to come up even in the next category, because it's going to be, okay, what do we do? What do we focus on? How do we get there? I guess the only thing I would add, and it's coming to staff and asking staff a question, but it goes right to, how do the MOUs play out right now? And what does that mean to staff? Like, we put these MOUs together as electeds. When we're out talking to the public about things, we bring up these MOUs all the time.
Absolutely.
Does staff, is this, how does the philosophy behind the MOUs integrate into the day in, day out work of both jurisdictions?
Yeah.
Mr. Richardson and Mr. Murphy, would you like to?
I think we better let,
Did you want to talk
this guy
first?
I'm the Rob and Bob over here, but yeah, I mean, I just the idea of the MOUs before we create new ones, look at revisions. I really do want to hear how they've been used. I echo a lot of what everyone else has said on that score, and that it would be, it's like the common bullet: identify mutually beneficial ways to cooperate and communicate where possible, including review of organizational structure of boards that serve both communities. That was a staff function identified for each of the MOUs, so it'd be great to hear about that. Like, for example, and looking at it right now, multimodal transportation, collaboration on small area planning along hydraulic and Route 29, that's hydraulic and that's RIO. We both did small area plans. So what is staff's idea about joint implementation? That was something that was spoken about at the last comp plan where we had the livable communities. So that's just an example of what I'm wondering if staff has an example of. And then the systems idea of all of our priorities, and I did do a diagram. I can send it around. I made some copies, but to me, there's like these global values that we have that have to do with climate and equity, race and equity, climate. They're big overarching values. And then you've got kind of place-based situational initiatives. And that's the neighborhood revitalization, that's the US 29 redevelopment, and that's affordable housing. It fits in. But then there's these local government fundamentals that are kind of the connective tissue of everything that makes a community, and that's public safety, it's schools, it's justice, it's economic and workforce development, it's health and recreation, and infrastructure. So to me, we do have three big buckets, and they are related, and then maybe what we can do is say, well, we have these shared values, and these are how we play out in the way we make decisions both at the local fundamental level, but also making decisions about a place-based approach. So, you know, I see that that's all, we're all on the same page, but the way it's presented, it looks like we're in separate tracks. And I don't think we are. And the more we can diagram and look at these things as systems, like Heather said, I think the more we'll start thinking collegially and comprehensively.
Maybe I'll just
I have
add
a question. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Well, as far as the racial equity part of it, I think one thing that's very specific that's coming up, I don't think we've officially voted on it yet, but for the first time, The county's going to celebrate the Freedom and Liberation Day. So that's, and we, thanks to Rick, started the honoring John Henry James Day too. So I think there are some, symbolic kind of things. Just a couple of, not overarching kinds of things. I don't think this forum is the right time to be talking about what the staff is doing so much. It's certainly important, but I think that's a follow-up kind of thing. I don't think the staff is ready to make a presentation on all of that. I think just the two specific things that I'm interested in focusing on as far as the environment is, I think that's a way to get the community involved. Greg and I were just talking about trying to show people what their carbon footprint is, and I know people who have done that online surveys kind of thing find it really stimulating to say, what can I do if we just have a general sense of we're going to try to do something for the to reduce our overall carbon footprint. That's important too, but I think getting people involved specifically in that could be really important. And as far as low-income housing, I personally am finding that it seems more critically important for seniors. I think low-income housing can be addressed with job training and other workforce development type things so that people can afford housing. Market rate housing is the goal, is to not have them have to be subsidized, but to have them be able to be part of the market. But seniors don't have that opportunity for the most part to increase their income. If anything, it declines over time. So I'm particularly interested in separating that a little bit to not just see low-income housing as one unified subject, but that the senior part of it is especially important. Thank you.
And my question is just, if staff doesn't have a list that, for those of you who asked, think that that's as long as you think it should be, then why is that? Because if these MOUs were written and if there hasn't been this collaborative effort, then it would be up to the elected officials, right, to set the tone, to set the tone for that. So I mean, first, what you all think, but then has the culture really been created for that, those collaborations to really happen in the seamless way that people are expressing?
I'm ready. You want to go first?
I would, please.
Oh, okay. So thanks for the questions. I want to start by saying, the overarching, like zoom back out to 30,000 feet again about tonight was, start about, we've done this a lot and we've done it for many years. The MOUs are one context under which we collaborate today. And I want to say that they don't really capture all of the collaboration that happens between the city and county, which is really significant at the departmental level. And it's an everyday consultation or partnership between Parks and Recreation or social services or other departments at the departmental level. So I do think that there is not just a climate or a spirit of collaboration, it's tactical, it happens every day. I think that part of the plan to just restate that we have the MOUs is there's been multiple updates to these bodies about here's the things on the list, here's what we do together, here's the ways that we are parts of or leaders in community initiatives that have to do with, because a lot of that education one isn't necessarily even us, it's how we're taking part in something that's happening at PVCC or in the Early Education Task Force, or we could go through those if that would be meaningful. I think that where we got in the planning for tonight, and certainly we're at your direction at any point, is to say we met together, we talked about revenue sharing. We talked about what the touch points are. We talked about how do we collaborate. Let's talk about partnership tonight. It's a weird time of year for us to be talking about this and have it direct resources because we are deep into the budgeting process. But the ultimate takeaway for tonight is once we get through this middle section, for you all to say to staff, these are the really important things. And if we're going to have a plan that we jointly put resources, either staff time or money or both behind, we want staff to know that today so that we could meet with you all again jointly in August or September and say, well in advance of when you're going to make decisions in March for the 2021 budget, these are the things that are a regional effort, a joint expenditure, a resource. That's the big picture of where we're trying to get tonight. Any way that helps you all get there, if you think that that's the right objective for tonight, we're prepared to do that. If you want to hear specifics about what happened to this item in an MOU, we can do that. You want a written report after this meeting, we can do that. Otherwise, I think some of what Mr. Randolph said, give us two big things and we'll establish some groups and bring you back something really worthy of your consideration of taxpayer dollars and staff time.
But there are some things, I just want to throw this in really quick. This is a transportation alternative grant year. We could be talking about those kinds of things, of using that, and that's not getting into the budget right now. So.
Totally agree with you. That was one of two potential tracks for tonight was let's talk about, a meaty here and now problem that you all could be problem solvers on. And we went with more of this long-term strategic trajectory for the meeting.
The only thing I want to add is that I hear the frustration for those who've been on the council and the board longer than I have, is they feel like they did that 2 years ago in 2016.
17.
And we've had changes.
18 apparently.
That's right. That's right.
I've had changes in, I saw the signature to 16. The signed dates were 16. But what I'm saying is that, and don't disagree with what we're saying, we should be continuing to do what's going forward, but, as Liz said, that this should be, if we get a recommended budget, as we're about to get, and that budget's not informed by these 5 MOUs, I think we're going to be asking some tough questions of our county executive. So I think what we're asking, what I hear being asked by others, is that these 5 things were highlighted and prioritized, right? We've already said these are big picture items. What's going on?
And what were the opportunities that staff might have uncovered that would have created an opportunity for joint funding, for joint initiatives, out of these goals, out of these MOU categories? I mean, that's how I've been thinking.
And to be fair, the leadership of not only do the elected bodies change, but both our bodies have had leadership changes.
Right.
So that what I've been saying, I feel, is targeted towards. I don't want to give you guys an out, but I mean, that's your out. I mean, what was going on that led us to here? But there should still be some accountability for that, because that should have been commuted. There should have been some. What's the culture? What does the culture exist beyond the electeds? But that's my response to that.
And Mike, I want to explain. I wasn't asking for a detail of what all you all have been doing under these. I was asking big picture. Has the structure of these MOUs helped you? And if it has, let's speak to it. We're trying to get, in my opinion, we've had these around for 3 years now, 4 years, and I'm just trying to get a sense of whether they're working for you, if it's guiding your work. It gets to what Ned's saying, I think. Then we can come around to some of the other issues, such as what you were talking about, and Rick, I think. But I'm just trying to get a sense of how these are informing your work, and if they are, and how they are, and how we could help if they're not, because I think our members have established these are really important for a good while. And I don't know if that helps or not. And I'm sorry, Jeff, it's your turn, I guess.
I think that as a person who's not been here for terribly long, I think that the MOUs are extremely important. They're very beneficial. I think that both city and county staff, my perspective, that we appreciate clear direction from both governing boards that say, we expect you to work in these 5 areas and to collaborate. I think there is a lot of day-to-day operational, I hear people say behind the scenes, day-to-day operational, the staffs are working very well together in a number of areas. And I see people back there that are nodding now. Are there some opportunities that we've missed? Most certainly there are. Could we point to some budget opportunities for staff to get together before January to talk about these 5 areas, leadership in the staff areas, and talk about CIP alignment, opportunities for prioritization for board members to take consideration of? We absolutely could. So I think there is an opportunity to do more and to look at it in these 5 areas and say, what are some missed opportunities? What are some resource needs that we don't have? But I see, again, in the short time that I've been here, I see the city staff and the county staff in the areas that I'm exposed to. I see them working well, and I believe the MOUs are a great guide. I think the seriousness in which these 2 boards this evening are approaching these to say these are very important to us, and we expect you to produce some results. That I hear that, and so Mike and I and our staffs, we can leave from here and say, let's do more between now and the August-September timeframe, and let's explore where some opportunities are that maybe we've not been talking about, and also involve our teams and maybe be ready to talk about opportunities for the future. Have I said anything that you've been here longer than I have? So anything that you would adjust or speak to?
I'll just say also, I mean, I agree with everything Jeff and Mike just said. In one area that seems like an obvious place is the budget. And before this meeting, Lori and I and a bunch of us had discussions about how our budget processes may look a little bit different going forward. We could have different discussions. We could have it earlier on. I mean, we already collaborate with each other's budget offices quite a bit, but mostly during this time of year when we're all scrambling to get the budget balance and figuring out what everybody's doing, right? So to have those strategic discussions in the summer and the fall would be really valuable. The city is also getting ready to refresh our strategic plan. So we're going to have a new 3-year plan. So having some of this as the foundation of that would be very helpful, because then it will be in our strategic plan. At least a portion of our plan will reflect this, and then we can really put together what that means and show, I think start showing exactly what it is you're looking for in terms of some of those results. So it's not an afterthought, but it's part of our strategic plan and built into what we're already doing. So, and the budget is the same way. That is not an afterthought. That is what we do. So if we can somehow, I'm a process person, so thinking about how we work these into those processes, I think would be the key to saying, okay, if these are your important issues that we all want to share, then we can demonstrate those through the budget and through our strategic planning processes. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I found it interesting at our pre-meeting that it didn't occur to me that, that we do a strategic plan a 2-year cycle.
Right.
And then the city's on a 3-year cycle. Now budget, we're on the same cycle.
Correct.
Right.
So it's easy, right? But then when you're on a different cycle like that, just as like, oh yeah, that's going to be interesting to try to align up common interests when you're even on a different. I don't know if we do anything about that. I'm just saying it was an interesting thing to learn.
Well, it's certainly something to keep in mind.
Correct. Yeah.
As long as we're just kind of having, there's a lot of very general, very important discussion here, which might seem like we're spinning wheels a little bit in a couple places, but otherwise there's some other specifics. I just want to put in one very big picture thing, just to go back, because I'm thinking back to 3 years. I know that at least in the discussions that we all were having, Some of these were just a means to a bigger end, which was growing regionalism.
Yeah.
So regionalism is a big topic around the country, and the feeling that the policymakers had at that point was, look, we're right here, ton of progress as testified to right here, but there's a big picture outcome which we could aspire to have, which will be to have more regionalism after these MOUs would be in place and enacted. Regionalism is a little bit of a moving target. It means one thing in the Washington area, it means another thing in Seattle, it means another thing in some, in the Research Triangle Park, it means another thing in different places. Here, we wanted it to mean something more robust, especially given how at odds the two jurisdictions had been and how, in some things, not all things, but how prevailing that picture was. And we really wanted to grow together and work together more and have be regional and have that be the default. So I think, that still is my belief, is that the two governments ought to be more regional in approach. They ought to be more closely aligned, merged in some aspects, as they are in some important instruments, separate obviously for now, but anyway, so that still to me is the ultimate. These things are all a means to an end of more regionalism.
I would jump in on that and say that I think one of the issues that is we've had it as an MOU from the outset with affordable housing. I think we all recognized as a city and a county together that the best way to approach that, understanding that the housing needs within a totally urban context may be different than a urban planned residential development and rural context in the county, but would be to approach it through the TJPDC. The TJPDC is we're very fortunate to have a regional entity, and thank you again, Chip, this unsolicited endorsement for the use of the building tonight. But that allows us, I think, on some subjects to really kick it into a regional level and gain perspective from the other counties that are not part of this dialogue directly, this dyadic relationship between the city and the county. And that's really valuable because those problems cannot be solved as the transit problem cannot be solved in the dyadic relationship. It's got to be broader. But there are other subjects like the educational issue that really can be solved between the city and the county, and we have that cooperation right there. I think on the environmental field, there's no question there's going to be a value to approach it regionally. Now, how much of a buy-in there will be from the surrounding counties where they may be a little bit more skeptical, can we say that, of the importance of addressing environmental issues, and skeptical of the notion of climate change in its real sense, that may be more problematic. So that may be, yes, ideally kick it to a regional level, but we first probably are going to need to work together on that subject. So there's some that are really going to work between the two of us, and there are other subject matter that quite appropriately is going to fit in a regional context. And as we look at these up here, 2 out of the 5 is really good. Economic development, and on the education front, I think that dyadic relationship is very strong in terms of the kind of cooperation between the parties.
So to that point, Mr. Randolph, and I think you and I were on the same level, because I was just, as Mr. Signer was talking in regards to regionalism, and I was reading the MOU again, what came to my mind is, I agree, we have the TJPDC, what's the acronym? TJ, so many acronyms these days. TJPDC, right, to do the regional aspect. But if we're looking specifically at affordable housing, a tangible thing, I'm wondering what prohibits us from both jurisdictions or both bodies saying, okay, we want to direct the TJPDC to figure out how they can build a 200-unit structure for half of the units for people from the city, half of the units for people from the county. Let's figure out how to pay for it, where it'll be, and we want to direct them to do that, and we want to have this structure built within 2 years or 3 years. Those are things I think that tangibly we can start working out those details tell that to our constituents in the community and let them know, all right, from a regional perspective, here is tangibly how we're going to work together. This is a specific need that we've been hearing from both municipalities. Let's both figure out how we can put our resources to it and then say, here's our plan to accomplish this. Because I think a lot of the other stuff, like, yeah, we know we work together, and some of it is like theory, and some of it is like, all right, you know, we're gonna do this, but we can come up with concrete plans to let our constituents know, we hear you, let's fix this for both of us. Both of us will benefit, and I'm just throwing out like a 200 unit, but I'm just saying, like, we can do that. We can direct them to do that. Like, can we start talking about those things?
Then that's a really great transition point, I think. So I think from the MOU discussion, we've heard strongly that the two elected bodies feel that the MOUs have set forth shared expectations in those 5 areas, and that, you know, the expectation is that staff is working on in partnership on those 5 items, and that those are still a good list of 5 areas to be focusing on regionally. As we look to the future, you know, the strategic planning processes for the city and the county, and I think Ned brought up that in the planning meeting we realized that the city and the county are on different schedules and cycles even for those processes, but that those are the nearer term tool that is used to guide resources in the 2 communities. And so we put together the strategic priorities for the about to kick off plans for the city and the county, and ended up with this slide here. And I think that, you know, sets the stage for a conversation about the future. And so what are those things that, where there are connections between the strategic plan areas under the auspices of the MOUs, where you know, when we get together again, late summer, early fall, where would there be a lot of energy around having more concrete discussions around project areas?
And I'm not sure, Emily, if this answers your question, but I do think I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that coming from at least 2 of these MOUs and priorities, we now have a regional affordable housing partnership. TJPDC is leading, and so far they've had 1 meeting. But it started. And in a way, and I'm only speaking for myself, but when we're talking about regional affordable housing work together, I hate to kind of get out in front of and have something else going. I mean, it seems like to me that we have decided that we want to participate in that, and that is something that we need to give a little time to see how that evolves. The other piece is that from the transportation piece, we have certainly said the regional transit partnership is critical to Charlottesville and Albemarle. That also involves, of course, the university, and but that piece really touches on our work around affordable housing, our work around equity, and so both of those areas really touch on. They're almost linchpins to make everything else work, if that makes sense.
It does.
So I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we really have 2 partnerships.
Values of
Yeah.
sustainability and equity.
Yeah.
You've made
Yeah.
the environment a goal of yours, we've made equity a goal of ours, but we both would do well, I think, to look at the lens, through an equity lens on everything we do.
Mhm.
And we would also do well to look at everything we do through a sustainability lens.
Right.
And so transportation and housing gets both.
And the other issue that, you know, of a reason to wait to see where we are with the housing study that TJPDC group is doing, is that we have to know where our affordable housing is now. We don't want it all in one place. You know, I'm very sensitive to this because a lot of it is going into one small area in my district, and this is the one I keep bringing up about the transit and the need for transit.
Well, the existing is already in one place too, and
Oh,
then, and
and
we're
you're
about
right.
to do it again.
Right.
We're about to repeat that again.
Right, and Elaine Eccles, our senior planner, who recently, to our chagrin, has left us, She's retired or retired from us, but she was a big advocate for recognizing where the affordable housing needed to go, how much do you have in different areas, those kinds of things, to make sure that you plan it. And she would point out several times to me that there's only so many properties in the community that are not developed at this point that would lend themselves to those kinds of projects. And of course, we all have all the legal issues of how we pay for those and how they are paid for. So it's a big subject is what I'm saying, I guess.
And so I haven't been doing this long, but I think we have a lot of conversations about other conversations that need to happen. And I know a lot of planning has to go in to how stuff gets done, but that can also prevent stuff from getting done.
Mm-hmm.
So even bringing up the TJDC. Yes. I'm on one of those, I got it. But the housing, you take it where the city council has to have conversation about housing within the city of Charlottesville. Albemarle is having conversation about within Albemarle County. Then we start discussing Charlottesville and Albemarle and those collaborations. That regional board is talking about surrounding counties too, and what does the expanding from Charlottesville and Albemarle, what does that look like? And so then we have to bring in those communities, which we are all. I mean, I drive through, I have family that lives in Louisa and Orange. I understand why it's important, but it also prevents us from coming up with a plan in terms of what we're talking about here, Charlottesville and Albemarle, and and I know that it's the hope of that committee, Chip, so I'm not trying to push that work down the drain, but that committee that will look at, each individual region and then what a plan looks like overall. I just do have some concerns about how do you get moving and going and the activity, to start producing things that are needed when you start thinking from that direction, even with the regional transit authority or partnership. If we had to wait until Louisa was a part of the conversation or at the table, and that's pushing us further out in terms of what we're coming up with, like, at Timberland Park, I need a bus to get out there. That's a conversation that we can have without, bringing in, yes. So I think we have to, we know that there's a bigger picture, but when for us to not say what is possible for these two bodies now, and then maybe have a conversation with Chip about what does that look like, with the surrounding counties involved or bringing this discussion. So that's one thing I have, the concern about. Even on our screen, the race and equity piece being, at the bottom, and that conversation, having to fuel what happens in every other area because it hasn't been happening, which is why we're still having some of the conversations that we're having now. So part of those discussions, you have to have them out front. It can't be just, embedded in somewhere. It has to be, kind of clear. We know that even our two bodies, that we are in different, places now with even those discussions. So there's still work that we're going to have to continue, that you all may just be starting, but still there has to be something that we can make a list and say these are things that we are willing to explore with our staff, instead of, I think it just, in all the meetings I go to, after we have 25 more conversations than we may be able to. That's difficult, and I think you end up in a situation where you sign MOUs in 2016, and then maybe, as what the elected officials at that time thought could come out of that hasn't occurred, because we kind of get bogged down in that, or that's what I'm feeling.
Oh, and I share that sentiment 110%, because I really fear, I'm not trying to say this to to make anyone feel bad, but if we just continue to push like what we know is needed for both of our jurisdictions on other committees and regional groups, it is going to take us a very long time for us to address the needs that we know we need today. Like there's been
Near, middle, and long-term strategy.
so I agree we need near, middle, and long-term strategies, but I wonder what do we come out of this meeting, and then even when we get together again in the summer, what will we tangibly come up with that we can start telling our public that, yes, we're going to look to address this issue, whether it be affordable housing or revitalization or school space needs, whatever, that we're gonna start working on this like now. There, you can look for us to have a solution within X amount of days. We hear that you need housing. We're going to start working on this now.
Well, if I may, looking at the MOU, which had some tangible items on it, and I'm looking at education, and it said, now therefore be resolved, one of the things was to consider recommendations of the pre-K task force. Okay, with our staff, were there recommendations from the pre-K task force that would warrant joint funding of our jurisdictions on something? That would be really helpful to know. And that's a tangible thing, and it was identified in 2016 as something that we were interested in tracking. But is there something now that's concrete out of those recommendations from that task force that would compel both the county and the city to jointly fund and locate somewhere? I mean, that's just an example.
Yeah.
And here's another example. Under transportation, the city and county long-range bicycle vision network, part of the city bicycle master plan, examples of cooperation. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the thing I've already brought up 3 times tonight, which is the getting under 64 safely from the county to the city at Azalea Park. And that could have been something that we could be working on that's tangible, that we can come out of here, that we can look at applying to the Transportation Alternative Grant Program if we expanded that, not just to be a little sidewalk under 64, but to get into the city via the land that you guys purchased for,
Right.
for you know, a
Ms. Palmer,
trail
may I ask you a
to
question?
get in there.
What would it take for us to make that happen? Do we just need to designate a route? Do we just need to advise CAT to?
Our
develop a
staff
route?
on both sides have been working on that. So all we would need to do is turn around, I know on the city side, and ask Kevin McDermott, who's in the
On the counties.
county side.
So Kevin's new for the city, if that's.
No, and you have Chris,
Yeah, a lot
and
changed.
he's I'm sorry, Kevin
I got you.
McDermott from the county, sorry,
Right.
and Chris Ginzik, obviously from the city, and and ask them, how could we get this done?
Yeah.
What would this look like? And I'm betting they have some really great ideas, and they could actually talk to us on
So I'll
that.
say to Mr. Murphy, and as well as to the rest of my colleagues, I would be very interested in hearing what we need to do from a city's perspective in terms of getting that done. And if we could, I would like to request of my colleagues, maybe we can get a report of sorts to figure out what we need to do on our end to make that happen. Because I hear Ms. Palmer, and I think it does make sense.
I want to,
There was an offer earlier about a report back in writing for a lot of these questions. I think Mike made it, and I would like to request that because I think this provides us with the information we need in order to take the next step. We're talking a lot about different things that may be already in process, the initial parts of them, that we just need to find that out first, and then we can make more meaningful conversation about which ones to prioritize. I do think that we also need to remember there may be some different approaches in the 2 jurisdictions, and affordable housing is one of them, where our focus for many decades has been working with private industry, leveraging their effort, and also dispersed throughout the county. So we're having interest in maintaining the small and affordable places in the rural area where individuals live, as well as in our growth areas where people are living more closely together. So it isn't just one silver bullet that we should be putting all our marbles toward. We have to really think about how to bring the biggest value for citizens who have very different needs, many of them.
Well, I think it's a useful exercise for
us to, I mean, I've heard some very specific things about, okay, here's some real nuts and bolts of how we can make this happen or what should be on the radar. And I hope some of those will continue. It was my hope in this meeting more of those would come out, because I think it's useful for staff, our leaders, to hear us brainstorm those, because in the back, or, you know, where everyone's sitting there going, nope, that's in process, that's happening, oh, that's a good idea. That also could start stimulating brainstorming happening with our staff members to help do the same thing. But then it also could put some really good ideas on the table, and we all can, just as, you know, Wes has already moving one along there, taking action, and that's exactly what I was kind of hoping would come tonight. So if others have kind of specifics, even if they feel like they're down in the weeds, I think it's fine to throw those out. They don't need to be discussed necessarily, but it could put some things on the radar and see what comes from it.
Task force.
Right. There was that. There was the units that was talked about earlier. We've got this one. There was one more I'm missing.
I think senior low-income housing somewhere near the center at Belvedere, Rio 29, which we're trying to redevelop. I mean, there's just an obvious need right there. Public transportation going downtown already exists from that area. So something in that area for low-income seniors, I think, is critical in terms of a priority. And there's no question that we need that. Wonderful that the TJPDC is doing the study, and that'll be very useful. But there's no question that we're going to find out that we need low-income senior housing. So I think finding the right spot for it is the #1 priority for me.
And where we are in the ABRT revamp process, and that was usually a collaborative effort, and that this year is the first year in a while that you know, the county is on its own track, and the city, you know, the funding the application process was frozen this year so that we could explore the process. That is one of the areas that I did, you know, want us to, you know, hear back from staff. How do we get those that process back on the same track, and if it's possible. So that would be one for me.
Sounds good.
I just wanted to, to the extent that this discussion has been about the MOUs, for the press and anybody who would actually look at them, they were and are written to be very general. The specifics on all of them, they're virtually identical with exception of the environmental development one. They all have the same bullets, which are designate a staff member assigned to promote success. Identify potential available resources available to both localities. Identify and consider potential efficiencies through harmonization. Identify and consider potential impacts on each other's jurisdiction of acting without information sharing. Identify mutually beneficial ways to cooperate and communicate where possible. So the 5 priorities that we had, there were 4 and then there was one that was added. This was meant to mandate by the governing bodies, the 2 staffs, to work in that way going forward, no matter what the input was. The input could be gotten through a work session like this. It could be, say, and they were also meant to be measurable. So it would say, and we actually did have a couple of really good meetings 6 months and I think a year after these were first passed, where staff came and did a full PowerPoint. This meeting is there are a couple different purposes here, but it's not really fish nor fowl. So like if it's identifying new inputs that go into this, that's one thing. If it's getting measurables from staff a couple years in, saying, here, now, at this point in time, here's what we've done since the last one. If we just did that, that's a pretty useful thing compared to where we were 3 years ago. It was meant to require staff to cooperate in a new way on those 5 different ways. And then there's like a couple of specifics. Pre-K is very unusual. And then the economic development is actually very unusual because it says focus on maintaining jobs and capital investment, share referrals to new business projects, and not to actively solicit or initiate discussion to encourage the relocation of any business from one to the other. And then a few other specifics. That actually has like 10 specifics. That's an unusual one. The others are the same. That was what we agreed to require as a matter of policy.
But I think what we're also hearing, though, we didn't want just policy outcomes. We wanted tangible outputs from those policies. Okay, so I just want to make sure that.
Yeah. I think that's what Mike was saying.
Okay.
That's why the report will be helpful.
To develop and enact plans too.
So I think
And then
that's
we would get those plans.
for the next meeting that I'm hearing could be coming place in the fall, the outputs are what we're asking to have that, the focus of that meeting be, is what I've been hearing.
Or sooner. I mean, I don't, we, in the next,
To have it whenever it's possible to have it to read, because we don't need to read it here in the room, we need to have it.
Got it.
and then
We could get a report from some specific aspect of that without it having to be
Understood.
6 months that we
Yeah.
get
Right.
everything organized.
I mean, and to your list, you just, Mr. Chair asked for, you probably got about 10 or 12 there. I would add the Ravenna River, because we have a new plan that took a lot of resources to put together, which definitely crosses both jurisdictions, and there's a lot of actionable items there for each of us separately and together. And then the bike ped plan, which was just, got to a whole new level, and there's all kinds of expense there that we could be doing together. We could be enmeshing the two projects, because obviously bike lanes are gonna go across, or do they change the way that they look from the city to the county? So those are two.
I'd like to also add, though, that when we're talking about these projects, that the staff of both of our staff need to inform us what are the resource needs to
Sure.
make these things happen. Because, and I'm gonna throw out, again, getting back to the climate change, we just had a meeting today with our Office of Sustainability and with climate change community activists. And we have, through the mayor's contact, and then you've got LCAP, you know, we have these greenhouse gas reductions that we want to achieve.
Right.
The public is telling us it's not happening fast enough. Well, that's gonna need to be resourced, and it needs to then also overlay with our equity ambitions. So I think when we're asking staff to follow through in these MOUs, staff has got to be very candid with us and tell us, you don't have the people power to get this done. And if you really want this done, you need to invest more. So that just came to mind because it was fresh on my brain because of our discussions about greenhouse gas reductions. But the same thing can be said about the Rivanna River plan.
Well, and I think the Ravenna piece, the trails piece, some of these other things, it speaks to why our CIP process also should be
Totally.
in sync, but it's also, you know, we might have a project listed number 4 on a CIP priority list, and you might have one that's listed number 5, and how are we going, wait a minute, those two kind of connect, and if it was a joint effort, that might get us all
Be
thinking
number
it's a
one.
number 2, you know,
Yeah.
so, because it
Yeah,
would be some
yeah.
efficiency, so how does that come to be and how to happen? That's kind of a,
And
I would
that,
suggest,
I just real quick, and that is what has happened with my little piece that I keep bringing up, is I keep being told, well, that's not for 3 more years on the city CIP, and so it's exactly a
Right.
problem.
So maybe, I know we're both in our budget cycle and we're wrapping that up, but maybe if there's some recommendation from staff about potential dollars we need to set aside for things that may need to happen before the next budget cycle, so that when we come together again after we get this report, if there's something that we want to focus on, that there will be funds allocated that could be potentially allocated.
well, I might go a step further and just ask whether there'd be the possibility of a joint session of the two bodies on the CIP, on their CIPs. It might be crazy talk, it might not be. We have a ton of meetings, but where you'd actually have dialogue in the same room, and you'd have, I mean, we never have the ability to go to each other's meetings, but considering the amount of dollars that are on the table and the implication for each other's jurisdictions of those, you know, multi-million-dollar projects, it could be very interesting. It could
That-
be profitable.
That actually is a pretty good idea, because certainly our CIPs connect in some
Absolutely.
ways. And I would be remiss if I don't point out to you that if we are actually going to get people, if we're going to move on affordable housing, and if we're going to work on economic development and jobs and education, we have to be able to move people around this county. And that's going to probably mean CAT is going to have to increase some of their services, we're going to have a serious conversation around whether or not we're going to be rerunning the buses more often, how we're going to move, how we're going to structure this, and it could mean money for transit. because you're not going to get there with what we're doing right now with CAT. And I'm not being critical, I'm just saying if we're going to take all of this to the next step, much of it's going to involve transit, because many of these folks are, when a constituent is having to change buses 8 times round trip to take a job, he's not going to take that job. And that means he's having to live in a place where he can't get to his job or he can't get to his educational opportunities. So I'm just saying, when we're thinking about budgets and money, I don't want you to leave transit out of this, because it connects to a lot of this.
And I don't think budget has to wait a year. I mean.
No, I don't think so either.
I understand that staff is at the end of their process to bring it forward to the board, our board.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that Mr. Richardson knows that if we bring something up that he didn't plan for, then we want information on it. You got to work it into the conversation.
Right.
We're going out and talking to our community. We're having meetings. We start to do that during the budget process for that very reason. So there's certainly the opportunity for both of us to go, well, wait a minute. This is something that we're talking about as important. We'd like to allocate some stuff for it. Now, it may mean you have to take it from somewhere else that staff had previously recommended, but that's the part of the budget process. So, and that's not to dispute anything. It's just to say we do have the ability, because that's our job, is to make sure they go, wait, we want that budget that started July 1. Now let's figure out how to make that happen.
And this kind of gets back to what Mike's saying about the budget and the capital improvement program, because a lot of this is around those sorts of expenses.
And it's harder for a $40 million CIP project
Yeah.
or a big ticket item, but not about allocating for something that could be something that would let us be nimble to work together, where it's maybe not as big of an allocation of funds.
Right.
It could be, there might be a leaner way to, this is dangerous brainstorming on your feet about something like this, but maybe there would be a way of adding into a budget session that's already scheduled an invitation to a quorum of the other body, and then having an additional half an hour or something like that for there to be some.
Talking about getting something into this current fiscal year.
Into this cycle of budget discussions, I could see there being.
Be very selective about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with that.
don't-
But I
don't
really
see
do.
that.
I'm not saying the current fiscal year,
No.
I'm saying the next fiscal year.
Right.
That we're about,
That's right.
That's
That's
fine.
right.
budgeting through.
And then as an exercise in what we're looking at and what's to come, what's coming, and what we,
Get back to what
Right.
Mike said, it's like summertime. We have a session, and we start thinking about FY '21.
So I think we're having, that was 2
that's what we're,
Okay.
I think that's more what we're talking about, right.
But if
but
we
I-
wanted to talk
do
about
think-
some of these smaller projects, like Ned suggested, or more bus stops or bus routes and things like that, those are things we could
I mean, there were some,
consider.
you
Well,
know,
that's
the
true.
timing of a meeting like this can be scrutinized at whatever month you schedule it in. But the beauty of this meeting and the timing of it is that it's going to be fresh on all of our minds as we go through our current budget.
Right.
And that's a positive in my view.
And
I
we,
was going to say that I think there's real value after the budgets are passed to sit down and look at the 2 different CIPs.
Mm-hmm.
We also have to understand that, as we've been reminded tonight, that the city operates under a 3-year strategic plan. We operate under a 2-year. That the city's process of developing the CIP and the way it's vetted and reviewed and discussed and then recommended to the council may be different than the way it gets vetted to the board. So we have to understand the 2 processes are not necessarily in symmetry. There's therefore a different culture around the development of the CIP. The point about there is no right budget. Every budget reflects the values of the community. So there is not the ideal budget. There is the budget that fits according to the priorities of that community. So we have to understand that. And those priorities are not just always strategic. They are also, in some cases, other priorities that come into play. So I do think there's great value in July to get back together and look at the 2 CIPs, and actually, as we've done right here, that Emily has presented to us, to see where those projects match up and where perhaps going forward we could look at more collaboration based on that level of potential that we see from what we've already passed this past year and say, how do we build on that? Maybe one of the ways to build on it, and I like the idea of getting everybody together, but it's a hard thing to do time-wise. But perhaps what could happen is that a member of the county would actually be present when the city is putting together its CIP, and a member of council is present when the board puts together its CIP, and you have that kind of dialogue and interplay back and forth. And so it can be brought back to council, it can be brought back to the board as far as what's being developed within the CIP. I mean, there are a lot of ways to build this, but I do think there's an opportunity here to have much more awareness of how we both develop a significant portion of our budgets for the long-term capital needs of the community, which really meets, in some cases, the same citizens' needs across jurisdictional lines.
Absolutely.
It could be one other thought, just because all these ideas are going to have strengths and weaknesses, and we're coming up with them on the fly. Was one other thought, because the challenge with that is that it's hard for one person to represent them, especially with our bodies. But it's a maybe is that you could have invitations extended, but then just like we contribute to a legislative letter where we say we support these bills, but the odds of them getting through is always whatever it's going to be, we could say we are each stakeholders in each other's community. We're neighboring, we want to take each other seriously, but we're obviously independent, and we could, each body could compose, based on the input of its members, a letter to the other body based on its budget priorities, and could weigh in, and that we wouldn't have to, it could be given the weight that, whatever weight you would give, but it would actually set a process in motion where it would be routine, where you would say, look, you surround us like a donut, we're in the center of you all like the whole of a donut, and we have, here's a, and we've been invited to the process, and here are some thoughts that we have, and take it or leave it.
Yeah, so even if we get these reports back, and if there's an agreement to work on a specific area, and then we're saying that even if, because our budget is tight, I don't know, I haven't followed your budget process, but I know that, our staff is already, don't try to pull anything else out of this, budget. But if we, and that I think goes back to the strategic planning and the overall, the broader picture, like what can we agree that is the best use of our resources and joint effort. If we are saying that the end of 2019 is an ideal time, from individuals that I'm hearing, these were plans that date back to 2016, and that's been a little too long, and that it's the next budget cycle, then that's, fine. I'm not hearing that that's clear, to staff. So from some individuals, I'm hearing we can wait another year. From some individuals, I'm hearing we want to get things moving now. And if there's going to be a budget impact, we need to be realistic and not ask them to find money throughout the year. I understand we can direct, but if we set priorities during the budget cycle, changing those at least in the direction that the city is going right now might be a little bit challenging. But if we can get staff to say what is possible, now, or at least know that we are working from some, amount of allocated funds, even if it's not specified for a certain at this point, then I think that just may work better.
I think it would help set priorities if we could.
If
do
we could
something
agree
now,
on,
if we could agree on a couple things, and even
maybe
if it's
not
relatively
today,
small.
tonight, but
No,
after
not
we get the
tonight.
report from them. Yeah.
But an ongoing, a couple times been brought up, we have these different cycles. This is one way I just wish we could kind of find some alignment. Can we get on a similar cycle and have these conversations? Because, right. I mean, we hear.
They just finished it.
No. I'm just saying as we look forward and like, is there a way to kind of try to sync this up? And that means one of us is going to have to adjust our cycles, and maybe that's us. I mean,
go to 2 years if we can sync up with their 2 years.
I just can't emphasize enough, when we hear from constituents, they're not just our constituents that come to our meetings. I'm sorry, most of them, I think majority sometimes are yours, but the point is, this is all one region.
Send them down the hill.
I've tried. But this is one region, and I mean, I'm sure that you have the same. I mean, this is a population that barely even knows where that dotted line is,
Right.
and I've said that again and again. And I just think that the more that we can look at it that way, I grew up in a state where we didn't have an independent city, so it was all one. And I think the more we can try to, even if it's not really happening that we're combining our governments, because that would just shake the whole world, I get it, but just do things more in sync and have more conversations, that we're showing this community that we are collaborating and that we're trying to address the needs of the region. I just think that we're all going to be more successful.
I think the mayor's point is well taken, though. Introducing new budget items at this late date is going to be quite earth-shattering. And we just had a meeting last week with our school board, and we got hit with a $50 million price tag. So I think it really is important that we get a calendar together. I understand Dr. Palmer's very good point about taking advantage of grants. And maybe that could be something, if we could have a calendar of grant funding issuances that could start helping us make decisions at different times based on when we can match them. But it's just very challenging right now to start changing the budget.
One of the things I would like to see is, for instance, on this whole transportation thing, we've got our Parks Department, we've got our transportation folks on both sides working hard to try to make everything sync up and get the pathways and get the bikeways. And they come up with pretty good ideas, but our CIPs don't sync. And for whatever reason, sometimes I think these don't bubble up together at the same time. Now, maybe I'm incorrect, but they don't seem to bubble up at the same time. And so those kinds of things, if our city manager and county executive could sort of direct a way to get those to come together at the same time, because everybody's working on the same thing and everybody wants the same thing.
I think a lot of that stuff does happen. See Mr. Davidson shaking his head. We're in constant communication between budget offices in the city and county, the parks groups in the city and county on some of these projects. And in fact, Jeff and I had some conversation this year about, something I took a little heat from the planning commission about, like, do you really need to put this money in there for the lighting at Darden Town, right? Well, I don't know how many years I've been part of the budget planning process at the city where we said, is it going in this year for the county? We have it in right now. And the answer was, nope. It's not going in on their end. And when I heard that it was in this year in the CIP at the county, I said, well, now's the time for us to be in partnership and keep it in. Right. I called Jeff and confirmed, is it really, really in? And so it stayed in. And so then we justified that in public. So I think there's a lot of examples like that out there where we are trying to have that communication.
And so maybe some of these priority transportation issues, these multimodal that have come up in the last couple of years, the network, maybe if our elected bodies understood that they were all done on both sides, we could move those forward. Somehow there's not the coordination that's getting it done as fast as at least some of us would like to see. We see these things kind of languishing for years, waiting for money on
I
so,
think that's a matter of sometimes just revenues, Liz.
well, I recognize that, but there is some,
But that's
coordination.
Part of what the advantage might be for us to have the ability to look at our CIPs and as a group, not to say that we're going to be meshing our CIPs completely. That's not. But it would be interesting for us, I think, to go through that exercise at some point. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying next week or even May, but I do think that could be a very beneficial exercise for us.
So I'd like to take a minute to recap, I think, where we've seen some consensus that there should be some reports on the MOUs and sort of their current state, and also an opportunity for recommendations that would have a joint city-county component to come forward to the two bodies. and that would demonstrate the resources that would be required to move those forward. And that there be potentially in the summertime a CIP meeting where the two elected bodies could get together and look at the two CIPs together, and whether that's a spreadsheet or a map together to sort of be able to identify those shared opportunities. To look at getting on the same cycle for strategic planning. A joint calendar for some grant opportunities to be able to advance regional projects. And does seem to be a question about, is there an opportunity and how can there be an opportunity for fiscal year 20 to do something together?
And yes, and Mr. Bellamy brought up the one that I was brought up. Maybe we could have a report on that.
To Old Lynchburg.
The Old Lynchburg
Access
Road,
under 64.
Yeah. Or expanding that, because for a transportation alternative grant, you would want a more expanded project, which I bet anything, staff on both sides has great ideas. So already, I don't think it's going to take a lot of work on folks' parts.
And I just think back to what the mayor raised earlier. I think there is interest in understanding what role the county would be willing to play as we go forward in this ABRT process.
The county would be
To be at the table as we're reevaluating the process, just to be part of that conversation with us.
I think we're waiting to hear what you all come up with. I personally am quite satisfied with the way we're going about it. So if you have changes you were going to propose, we need to hear those from you. I don't think it's our part to be part of your deliberations.
Yeah.
It's a
So,
work session now, so that I guess this is an invitation to come to the work session. Is that fair to say?
Because we haven't talked about ours at all this year yet.
well, we did to the point where we said, yes, we want to do it the same way. And that was a very affirmative decision on that part for this year. So we didn't just ignore it.
Well, no,
Decision,
I'm
we
just saying
wanted
that
to do it.
in our budget cycle right now, we haven't
The
had a
current budget
discussion
cycle,
about
we know, yeah, because you guys have already gone, you've made your
We haven't talked about ours
decisions are
yet.
coming out in February. Agreed. We're talking
Yeah,
about
our allocations, we haven't even talked about what our, I'm just saying, that- yeah.
So that question is more along the lines of if you all were willing to discuss the possibility of looking at a new process for the ABRT.
And that would probably take a work session and
Yes.
us understanding
That's what-
exactly what, yes.
Yes.
And I think that's what Ann was
That's-
saying, and yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, sure,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
I just meant we haven't had even that discussion about our ABRT process this year to know what our allocations are and what's happened. Yeah.
All right. So this is, will open for public comment. So just are there any final thoughts or comments?
or if staff has thoughts.
We have a lot of staff here. so-
Okay. So is there anyone that would like to speak? If you can come up to the mic and just because of time, if you can try to limit it to 2 minutes or so.
Did anybody want to invite any staff members who were here who could answer any of the questions we asked, lickety-split? Give them an opportunity to do that. There may
Well, I
not be
think
any
we
who
were
wanted to,
saying
but,
the
or do you
report
just
that-
want to do it through the report?
We'll
That's
get
fine,
into- we'll
okay.
Get into the weeds, we do that.
Not- The tax
Report?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you're.
Okay. All right. Any public comment? All right.
There's a
The microphone is
right-
up there.
There's one right there, yeah.
If you would introduce yourself and just say which jurisdiction you're from. The mic's right over to your left.
My name is John Edward Hall. I'm from the Fry Springs neighborhood in the city of Charlottesville. I'm running for city council. I'm very interested in workforce development and working with Rosa Atkins, the acting superintendent of Charlottesville schools, and developing a interaction at K-Tech to have trade, it's a trade school located on Ryle Road, have high school students and students that are there learning trades, be able to actually apply themselves in the community, to have hands-on work with contractors, people that are developing housing developments, putting them to work in order to move Charlottesville forward, and move our young students forward to develop their skills in this particular way. On the question of affordable housing, I have been out in the community where, for example, Carlton Views, there's a young man named Mark Briggs. He's got cancer. Carlton Views is a situation where there are bed bugs, there is mold. It was a place that this Mr. Briggs, he worked for Pete Dillon at the UVA basketball, the Cavaliers. You know, he's a very talented individual. He's had some pancreatic cancer issues and some metastasis to his liver, and his prostate is also affected. I have helped him move, and he's been moved to new development now. He's calling me sometime so that we can further interact. I've located a doctor.
Mr. Hall, thank you.
I'm Peter Krebs from Piedmont Environmental Council. I'm going to keep this really short because it is late. I just wanted to thank you all for recognizing the importance of mobility. I talk a lot about bike pedestrian transportation, but also transit was raised. That's really important. A number of you spoke about how this is one community and you never know, in a lot of cases, whether you're even in the city or the county. I heard talk about the city and the county staff working together on shared projects. And I have the privilege of working with both the city and the county staff. And I can say as a citizen that I observe a lot of good collaboration between the two groups. Of course, it can always be better. Of course, it could be maybe more formal, but good stuff so far. I also like the idea of the two groups working together on CIP funding. Right now, I'm trying to create a set of recommendations for the city and for the county, and trying to make it legible for the lay reader how those two things fit together is very difficult because actually they don't really. So maybe coming back together in the fall, we're going to have a list of pretty good projects in the forthcoming Jefferson area bike ped plan, and seeing how we as a community can work together and actually do things together, because that's how you come together as a community, by working together on things that matter to everyone, not by signing declarations. Maybe that's helpful, but really working together. So thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
I'll keep this really short too. Michael Monaco, I'm from Albemarle County. And I was really heartened to hear that climate change is such a priority tonight, because I think that's something that particularly regionally, both the county and the city can work together on, especially when it comes to issues of transportation and greenhouse gases, but also things like divestment. I mean, I know there's divestment talk at the city right now. I don't know what that is in the county as well, but that seems like an area where Learned lessons can be shared between both jurisdictions. These things are being done all over the country. Internationally, the country of Ireland divested from fossil fuels. So these are frameworks that exist, and I just hope that the county and the city can both use these existing frameworks and work together on those things, so that people aren't doing the same work in two different places at the same time, but rather working collaboratively together to make our region a really positive force in our state and country for climate change. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. So closing public comment. Are there any final comments? Counselors?
I just thank everybody for this because I think this was really helpful. It was a great, I just really appreciate the opportunity to chat and talk about. I wish we could do it more often, but I understand the challenge of getting all of us together with our calendars.
But to that end, like, and I know that Liz and I have spoken about this before, I think there's benefit in us getting together in pairs and just getting to know each other at another
Well-
level, and also just sharing our priorities and our you know, our mutual interests and our own interests. And so I know I'm going to take proactive nature at doing that with some of you. So if I reach out, that's where it's coming from. It's really coming from a place of just wanting to collaborate more.
You know, I will say one of the things, and this is just a thought, hearing you say that, one of the things that was the most informative for me, and I guess it's probably been 3 years, Norman, when you joined the Board of Supervisors, and we took each other on a road trip in our districts to point out to each other what we were concerned about. Now, I'm not saying that we can all get in, we can do that all, but it is something, Heather, to think about, because it really did. I'd never been in parts of Norman's district before. And just getting together in the car and riding and talking to each other about, well, this is an area that's concerning and this is, and I'll just leave it at that, but something to think about.
We also had a holiday party too.
Well, we had to, I must admit, we had to cut it short because I think his charge was running low.
And some of our districts, it
His
takes
leaf.
an hour to get from
That's
one end
true.
to the other. So if you're going to drive around, it's,
And I'd just like to make sure that our executives know what to do next.
That's
Yeah.
great,
Are you
Kathy.
feeling good?
I believe so. Emily did a good job, and I think that the board was listening hard and picked up on a couple of things that maybe we didn't pick up on. But Mike's got good notes, I've got good notes, and there's a report that will come back to the boards. And I believe what the boards are looking for is, I thought I heard a summertime opportunity for the boards to get together. You'll have these reports far in advance of that, but does that mean a July timeframe?
Sure. That's
great.
So maybe
I'm gonna be out of
June or August?
June or August.
Yeah, okay. Summer. Summer, and we'll look forward. Yeah.
We work 12 months a year.
All right, well, thank you all for being here. Do you have any final?
I just appreciate everyone taking the time to do this, and I think I echo Supervisor McKeel that it's been very productive. If there's no other comments with the supervisors, I'll go ahead and adjourn us to February 6th at 1 p.m.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And meeting adjourned for council. Thanks.
Thank you, folks. And thanks for all the people in the back who came out on this really, really cold night.